Testing.
All right, here we go.
I can hear you.
Hey, it worked. Okay. What about the audience? Can you guys hear us?
Whatever you did, it worked.
That's a bad sign because I don't know what I did. We're going to put Nick in charge of producing from now on. All right. How are we all tonight? Excellent. Thank you, Palm Dad.
Everyone can hear it?
Yes.
I'm busy, Logan.
Okay.
Svatic.
Okay. So.
Sorry about that.
It's been a week.
Is Lucy joining us or no?
She should be. I'm not sure where she's at tonight. I have messaged her. She might be tired. It is what?
Yeah,
this is in the morning in Warsaw.
This is very difficult to do.
So the big news of the war right now, that Ukraine strikes back. They have invaded the Kursk Oblast. It's humor abounds because it's the site of one of the largest land battles in human history, the Battle of Kursk, 1943.
It's arguably the largest, right?
Yeah, it's the biggest ever.
Well, certainly the largest tank battle. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, fair. Although, yeah, Lucy will be here shortly. But yes, that is the big news. You gave me a brigade count last night of 4 hetmen, I think.
Yeah, 4 to 5 brigades. And initially when this happened, the information that was coming in that it was a single brigade incursion, which initially what I thought when I heard that, and apparently some other analysts thought so as well, that it was a waste of resources. We'll see whether or not this turns out to be that, but right now it's looking fairly successful. But the thing that must be remembered is that usually like offensives like this, they're really, really dynamic during like the first 2 weeks, but they tend to bog down. And Ukraine does have a limited amount of people to bear, but they could very much. What I'm hoping is that actually with some of the towns, they're able to fortify around them and create a mess for any Russian counterattack. The hope, I mean, we don't have like a single objective, nailed down for this, but one theory is that this is a effort to seize and hold on to territory, not to incorporate it into Ukraine, but to seize it. And once negotiations begin, Ukraine has a place at the table, which I think is actually brilliant. And I hope that it remains this way, that they're actually able to hold this. So far, it looks like Russia has, at least we got some information today, that Russia has taken out some units from other areas where they're advancing, and actually advancing pretty steadily to send to Kursk. But it seems actually that they're not committing a whole lot of forces to it. They believe that they can use their internal MVD troops to handle it. And I think this caught everybody by surprise. But honestly, the one thing that I've noticed with Ukrainians during this war is they usually pull off something very, very impressive and daring at a time, using intelligence that they have, likely to intelligence that we have as well. I'm not sure if we helped them with this operation, but usually they pull off something pretty impressive, but they usually have a hard time. What's the word in military parlance? But it's not consolidating their gains, but pressing forward, like, when they have the initiative.
Sustaining the offensive effort.
Yeah, which is difficult. It's difficult for them to do, but they do, if they're able to, now they have areas which they have taken right by the border, and if they can, maintain a solid supply, their supply lines into Korskaya Oblast, it'll be, I think that this could. I'm not gonna think it's gonna be a game changer, but at the very least, it could give them some leverage. On the alternative side, though, is if it goes awry, if it proves to be sort of an attritive waste of manpower, then Ukraine has a real problem going forward. So, and actually, I'm not sure either. I might be wrong, but I think maybe in the coming weeks we might see smaller pushes in other areas of the Russian border. I'd love to see one, for example, into Belgorodskaya Oblast, because it borders any sort of buffer zone around Chernihiv region. I'm definitely going to support. So yeah.
Yes. So
you said 5 brigades. That's different from what I've heard. I've heard as many as 10.
Oh.
Some sources have even gone as high as 16. I don't trust those sources.
that seems a lot.
The
16
10
seems high, yeah.
Because they identified them by name.
Mm-hmm. What I've heard is that there's elements of those brigades, so not necessarily the entire units, but I've heard in total that it's somewhere around 15,000 troops.
Interesting, because the British identified it as being close to 45,000.
Oh, wow.
Over the border?
Yep.
Hey,
Which
Lord,
is
thanks for joining
at least
us tonight.
supporting this effort.
See, that would make some sense. You'd have back-end, tail-end logistical efforts on the border.
Right.
And then troops moving forward, attacking in the oblast itself.
Yeah, but I think it speaks volumes as to how good Ukrainian operational security is, as to the fact that this has been going on for more than a week and nobody still has a completely clear picture of what's happening.
Yeah, this is
I think
the surprise.
I think it also speaks to Russia's failure, actually, usually to heed intelligence warnings. From what I've actually heard, they were sounding the alarm, actually, troops at the border, that Ukraine was building up troops, and they thought it was, at the time, purely for defensive reasons, that they were trying to fortify that line because of a possible, there were multiple talks of a second Russian incursion into Sumska Oblast, but they I think it's partially probably an intelligence failure on their part, or at least failure at the political and probably military leadership to kind of heed it.
Now, one of the Russian mill bloggers, who admittedly are not to be a trusted source, but you still want to monitor what they're saying, said that the intelligence service had been alerting the people at military high command and in Putin's main office that something was about to happen. And they were ignored because everything in the south, in the Avdiivka direction, was the focus of their intent, and they couldn't believe that the Ukrainians could pull something like this off when such an offensive was already underway in the south.
It's funny because, it's ironic, actually. Russia has fortified more of its seized holdings in Ukraine than they actually have their own border.
Yeah.
And I would say, too, that probably the Belarusian border is very porous as well. Mm-hmm. Which makes me kind of wish that this was done in, I'm glad in one way, because, it takes away sort of, any possible retaliatory act in that direction. But I kind of wish it was done further north where my friends are, so it could, maybe have even more effect. Of course, there's obvious problems with making an incursion into Belarus, because then it, violates their sovereignty and potentially brings them into the war. But I mean, they're de facto, they're a vassal state. Like, I mean, that's putting it very mildly.
Yeah.
And Russian troops operate on their soil, and I think it's fair game, in my opinion. So I kind of wish that they would have done an incursion there.
Belarus being actively integrated into Russia.
Yeah,
Many
yeah,
levels.
that's kind of the long-term goal. That is to incorporate Belarus into Russia proper.
Mm.
One thing that's been interesting. So I've been kind of scouring the Russian X profiles. Just
Twitter.
searching
It's
Twitter, yeah, whatever the case. But it's funny because I'm seeing some people, some Russians. I've actually watched some videos. So the very interesting part about Kurskaya Oblast, Belgorodskaya Oblast, Voronezhskaya Oblast, a lot of these regions actually are heavily settled with people who are of ethnic Ukrainian heritage. Not all, by the way, loyal, having any sort of loyalty or feeling towards the Ukrainian state. But ethnically speaking, these are heavily Ukrainian territories. And actually, I've seen some videos where Ukrainian troops are going through a village and they're talking to elderly women there who speak basically the same mixed language that people are speaking over the border in Sumska Oblast. So it's interesting. And actually, I saw one with a woman who was, they were asking her, like, essentially, why haven't you evacuated? And she's just like, my legs hurt, I'm very old. And then they're saying, well, you speak Ukrainian. And then she said, no, I'm not Ukrainian, but I speak it because these areas have a lot of, Ukrainian was once common there. And so a lot of the older people still know it. So I found that very interesting. I also found actually some other videos of people greeting Ukrainian troops, not necessarily like as liberators, but a lot of these older people, they exist in Ukraine, by the way, too. But they essentially, they've had hard lives. This is a really poor area on both sides of the border. So a lot of them don't really care, who is controlling it, as long as they somehow can get their pension. So that's kind of the funny part about watching these interactions is so far I haven't seen any. It seems that the Ukrainian troops have been conducting themselves very well. I've heard some Russian reports that are hardly believable about some thievery.
I mean, apparently all those mill bloggers, as pro-Russia as they are, contradict the government quite a lot in their messaging.
I have seen
not by design.
I have seen reports of Ukrainian soldiers leaving Google reviews of Russian businesses.
Yes, I saw that. That was hilarious.
It's
Yelp review of a little diner.
Yeah, a little diner. Like they don't speak
that was
the language.
Hilarious.
Yeah,
good food, lousy parking. I couldn't get my tank in.
Yeah, I couldn't get the striker in the gas station. Like, come on, it's hilarious. Bad OPSEC, but it's hilarious.
I've been reviewing. I don't even actually know the name of the Russian supermarket chain, but they've been saying like how crappy it is, and actually that their version of it, which is Ateba, is better. So I've seen a lot of videos of that. Ateba is not great either. Just people know.
Yeah, the best Ukrainian church in the Kursk People's Republic. Bad service. Everyone is rude. It's not possible to drive my striker to car wash. Please correct this deficiency. Employees don't speak Ukrainian.
I've seen a lot of problematic memes of one from this guy who was of German descent, and it's funny because he had an Israeli flag on his profile, so obviously he's an Israel fanboy. But he had this like picture of Wehrmacht tanks marching into Kurskaya Oblast, and he's just like, Ukrainians pulling off blitzkrieg and making my ancestors proud, and I just ripped him a new a-hole.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been
Polish
a lot
people
of
are super excited about this development, I have
Yeah.
to say. Polish people have been, they've all been excited about all the Polish equipment that has been utilized. And of course, Polish people also do the memes of, oh, it feels like 1610.
That's better. I can deal with that. I can't deal with Wehrmacht
Yeah.
memes. And unfortunately, in
And
Ukrainian circles, you get some.
maybe they're just a big enthusiast of the game. Front us.
They probably are. They probably are. But it's more problematic. One, when you see a German person doing that, who obviously doesn't know shit about history, because that's not a good thing. They didn't do good things in Ukraine at all.
No. In fact, when I first learned about the specific of this, I think it was in high school. We had a pretty good teacher in high school. His opinion was that basically Germany screwed itself because potentially it had pretty good backing with people from Ukraine because they obviously didn't like the USSR. So they would side with the guys that would fight the USSR. But since the Nazis just killed everyone indiscriminately, they've sort of squandered that chance of having any local support that could have potentially made a difference.
There were actually some voices in the Wehrmacht and then even upper Nazi level leadership. I called them, in my MA paper, I called these people moderates. They're not moderate at all. Alfred Rosenberg sure as hell is not a moderate, but in regards to the Ukrainian question, he is. And his commissariat actually had substantial sway at the beginning over leadership in the Wehrmacht. The problem is the Wehrmacht sort of, their perception of what a Ukrainian is and versus, what a Russian is not very solid. Also, they tended to, I don't think a lot of these ideas, they were in the upper level leadership in theory, but they weren't really putting them into practice. So they had this idea of sort of like a hearts and minds campaign with Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. But in reality, when they encountered partisan warfare, they treated them, honestly, one, they had this sort of policy, the hearts and minds policy. They tried it not just in Ukraine, but also even in Russia proper and in Belarus too, which is, everybody knows about how they were in Belarus, but it didn't really have that much of an impact, at least in my findings of my studies. But
the problem, I guess, with the Hearts and Minds campaign was that while at least on paper in the USSR, if you behaved, so to speak, then maybe you had a chance to survive. But by the Nazis, you were just basically killed indiscriminately. And that
that's definitely right. And there's some caveats to it, but
yeah.
I think overall they had a harsher policy, and their racial policy, general racist policy towards Eastern Slavs, Poles. I could even argue, the Czech Republic's like Czechoslovakia is a whole different animal, but in terms of their long-term plans, they didn't really have much of a future.
Yeah. Basically there was a whole discussion about the squandered potential of possible alternative history in which Nazi Germany could have had local support of Ukrainian people wanting to fight against the USSR. Which, who knows what sort of effect.
One of the things I find interesting is that the Germans attempted to recruit a division of Ukrainians into the SS, and it basically turned into a giant training camp for the Ukrainian partisans. They'd send people to the training camp, they get equipped, They'd learn how to do everything, and then they'd desert and take their gear with them, and then another group would show up. And this went on for almost 2 years before the Germans
the problem is that this sort of thing that I'm talking about goes a bit beyond sort of taking Ukrainians to make regiments. I'm talking about stuff like, well, Germany attacked the USSR, not prepared for the winter. That's one thing, right? They didn't expect the thing to go for that long. And if you have local support, then you probably have people that would sort of help with that, provide any sort of, I don't know, local...
But that was part of the problem. When they went in unprepared, they then had to start pillaging to supply their forces.
They started their requisitions immediately after they entered Ukraine. You can actually, when you hear older people discuss how they, like their first impressions of Germans when they went through the villages, the Germans, so you'll find this very interesting, Lucy. So a lot of these people in the Operation Barbarossa, they had experience in Poland in 1939. So they would yell at these older women and people in the villages, "Yaika, yaika," you know, eggs, like mleko, 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 yeah, like and and of course, you know, a Ukrainian can kind of understand that, but they're like, you know, it's kind of like the Americans when they were in Vietnam, like utilizing the jargon.
In Ukraine, it is still very similar to mleko.
Moloko.
Yeah. So you understand it.
They understand it, but
although I had some really weird language barriers in Ukraine that I never expected to have. One of the weirder ones was when I went to a store to buy ketchup, and I couldn't find it, and I went to dude that worked at the store. I was like, "Ketchup?" He was like, "What?" It's like, you know, ketchup, pomidor, tomato. And then I was like, wait, in Poland it's okay, let me try this. Ketchup? Oh yeah, yeah, sure. And he showed it to me. I was like, oh yeah, because that's so different. Ketchup and ketchup. Yeah. That's a world of difference.
It's
It was such a warranted language barrier moment.
Trying to speak French in Paris if you aren't a native. Yeah, same kind of thing.
Ukrainians, if you know Russian or Ukrainian, mostly Ukrainian, if you actually make the effort to speak Ukrainian, they're very, very accommodating. Even Russian, actually, if you speak to some of them abroad and you know it, like, I mean, my girlfriend is a native Russian speaker. She's not Russian, though, but she's made tons of friends with Ukrainians all over Chicago because, you know, they have the common language, even Western Ukrainians, actually. It's very odd, but I was, you know, when I started kind of getting involved and hanging around with some of the local community here, I'm amazed because a lot of these Western Ukrainians who are, you know, that's traditionally the more nationalistic part. They have so many Russian-speaking friends, and they speak Russian with them too, no problems. And it was actually unfair to me a little bit. I went to they were playing poker or something like that, but everybody had to speak Russian. And my Russian's, I understand it very well, and I read it very well for research purposes, but
I don't understand it very well. I suck. I understand Ukrainian pretty well.
If you put in just the effort to do it for either one of those, you'll fly by me in like the space of a year, because it's,
I mean,
you know,
it's easier.
Slavic language. Yeah, one Slavic language is really, you know,
it's easier for me too.
My friend Kuba compared it to, like, you know, being in Boy Scouts and getting a merit badge, learning another Slavic language. It's not really like learning another language. It's, you know, a lot easier.
But through Ukrainian, it's much easier for me. The more Russian words I hear, the more lost I get. With Ukrainian, I understand like
Russian has
more
a lot
than...
Russian has the problem with Russian is it has a lot of influence from South Slavic languages, mostly through Old Church Slavonic. So it has some more similarities, for example, lexically to like Bulgarian. If you look at archaic Russian, though, for example, so like modern Russian, so take the names of months, for example. Modern Russian uses a Latin system, but the archaic form of Russian is basically almost the same as how Ukrainian months are. And then, you know, Polish too, that use sort of the pagan or older system.
Luty,
yeah.
kwiecień, maj, czerwiec i pierwszy dzień.
Kwiecień, yeah, in Ukrainian for April.
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
That's why, like, I can go, like, Polish.
Zaraz,
noticed.
Just sierpen.
I mean, because you have Ukrainian dziękuję.
Yeah.
You have
Dziękuję.
dziękuję, yeah.
Dziękuję.
And recently when I was on a bus in Ukraine, I heard a Ukrainian person say dziękuję.
Dziękuję.
Yeah, dziękuję. Like this
That's
mixture
funny.
of...
They must be learning Polish still.
Wow.
Because they're using like the first person singular.
Wow, this
verbal form. Yeah.
You have Russian and Ukrainian mixture, and now we're seeing a birth of Polish-Ukrainian mixture. Let's go.
I mean,
while as interesting as this is, let's try to steer it.
We got to return, yes. to our.
So we were talking about the Kursk Oblast. What do we think is the Ukrainian objective?
Well, I see it as threefold. And I don't know which one they chose, but it's certainly having three different effects, all of which are advantageous to them. The first is the whole concept of taking the land and being able to use it as a bargaining chip in future negotiations, should any develop. The second is that it puts Putin under a lot of pressure because he's going to be facing criticism from everybody that this actually happened, that Holy Mother Russia got invaded under his watch. And also the fact that all the oligarchs who are already around him looking suspicious at the fact that this giant strategic blunder is still going on, and they're losing money the whole time it's going on. They're probably starting to think maybe it's time to make Mr. Pooters go away. Whether they jump on that or not, I doubt it.
I think it all depends on what the situation, on how the situation develops in the part of Ukraine that is, we should not forget, still struggling a bit, Donetsk.
I would agree with that, and I don't know if it's just me being pessimistic, but I have sort of lost all faith in the люди навколо Путіна. You understand me, Lucy?
A bit.
The people who surround Putin. So like...
Ludzie Putina.
Люди навколо. Navkolo is like strong.
Yeah,
Are you referring to the Siloviki
around?
Basically constitute the central core of power in the country right now?
So that's the thing, you know, I've kind of lost faith in these people. You know, there's sort of a narrative that exists that, you know, Putin is only as powerful as those people who back him. And I mean, there's a degree of that true, but, you know, he's stolen so much and, you know, he's consolidated so much power and he has such a tight security apparatus around him that my faith, you know, I got very excited when Prigozhin did his little adventure. I thought more was going to come out of it, a little more than what it did.
He had no support.
He just quit.
Of course.
He just quit. He just like poof.
He actually could have probably kept going a little longer.
I wasn't so sure. I mean, after all the way he kept being like, "Oh, I'm against these people. I'm against Shoigu. I'm not against Putin, I
Change occurs
imagine.
from movements, not individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's
So, I mean, as much as I'd love to see him fall out a window or be pushed down a flight of stairs, this is kind of like what everybody's hoping. I'm just
So
not
would that
so sure that's
even
going to happen.
change anything?
That's the thing too. Is would it change anything?
I have a
I
sneaking
think to a
suspicion he'll
degree,
be okay, as long as something like if the Ukrainians somehow manage to get to Kursk itself, then Putin might have a real problem. But
Yeah.
no, he would. He has a problem now. I'm not discounting. I think the commander's right. He does have a problem. He has a greater problem with the people. It's kind of like the Tet Offensive in a way. That's that same effect. Whereas I don't. So that's going forward. I'm not sure, what this is going to yield militarily. But what it has shown is that Russia is very vulnerable. And this isn't a small incursion. This is, now that, even Commander brought it up today, and I believe it. I actually believe it's probably along the lines of of upwards of 30,000 to 40,000 troops. I think that probably is a reasonable estimate.
Mhm.
That's big. That's a big. That's not just that's basically an invasion. And they left. I'm
I
sure there's
mean,
other areas of
Core
the
level operation.
Yeah, I also think though that this is a gamble, and it's something that both the governmental leadership in Ukraine and the military leadership know, and I think that they took this gamble. Whether or not it will, yield the results that they're hoping, I'm not sure. But I think you're right, Commander. That I think it is the three objectives that you outlined. My hope.
I only outlined two of them. We haven't touched the third one yet.
Oh, the third one. Okay.
So the third one is purely operational from a military standpoint. Ukraine was having a great deal of difficulty down in the central area. The Avdiivka direction was advancing against them slowly, but it was advancing at horrific cost to the Russians, but also costly to the Ukrainians. And in order to stem that, by opening this new front, it forces the Russians to divert forces. And as we've seen already in their reaction to the invasion, they've been throwing second-rate troops, and they've been getting slaughtered or surrendering.
Yes.
So they're having to
Oh.
pull out well-equipped veteran formations from that offensive operation to go up and start stemming the tide.
Well, the
so
problem
it
is
alleviates the pressure on that portion of the Ukrainian line and allows them to build up a stabilized defense with some hardened fortifications.
I'm not sure if anything has changed, of course, because the situation changes pretty quickly over there right now. But I'm pretty sure Russia has been pulling troops from places like Kharkiv, even from Kaliningrad. Definitely, they've pulled people recently. That's been a whole thing. There's also been news of Polish troops training near the border. An article that claims Poland's gonna invade, which is a very funny thought. But as far as I know, they've been avoiding pulling troops from Donetsk, which is the part where Ukraine is.
My opinion is that they'll probably,
They've already identified at least 2 Russian brigades being pulled out of that area.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
or at least
2 brigades.
at least elements of those brigades. Here's what my take on it. I think that they are probably they're going to try with whatever forces they have available immediately until they can no longer, it becomes clear that they can no longer do that. And then they will start to have to pull these veteran units. I think there's still of the impression that they can hold this or halt it without that. And that's ideal for them because they are making gradual progress. The issue, though, is, and I think this is the primary goal, the primary objective of Ukraine from the start. It was to actually relieve forces in the Donbas region and help, essentially like divert them But
That is the gamble.
it's a big gamble, and honestly, the biggest hope that I have, as someone who of Ukrainian descent and someone who wants to go back there eventually, is that they are able to not just, that this isn't just a brief incursion, with them pulling out, that they're actually going to do something similar to what Russia has done and actually hold this for a while.
I don't know if that's going to be in the cards.
It might not be, but it might be. The one thing that the Russians have proven to me is that they can screw up almost any situation. They prove that to me consistently. It's not to say that they're completely incompetent. I think that that's a really wrong assumption.
Yeah.
And it's a wrong lesson to gain from this war.
They've been doing much better this year operationally than they were the last two. They've addressed a lot of the offensive problems that they've had. It's not a great solution, but they've solved it. Like the reports I see are like Russian soldiers being threatened, being shot if they don't advance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Russian army has a control of the situation that's dystopian, to be sure, but they have it where they did not before.
There are many people from, I don't know, either documentaries, interviews, even the live lecture that I've attended from a Polish field medic that they all say that the Russians are learning, that they are adapting to the situation.
Yeah, the other thing I think is interesting about the offensive, and we saw that column that got annihilated by HIMARS, is the movement of troops puts the Russians in a vulnerable spot. Ukraine has opportunities to destroy equipment and formations that weren't being
before they arrive and are able to set up.
Weren't being presented to them along the fortified fronts.
Yeah, and they can actually utilize some of their long-range technologies. So, of course, HIMARS and tube artillery, but also with them having F-16s now. You're probably going to see some bold uses of F-16s very soon. It's definitely not. We've talked about it. All three of Lucy wasn't on the stream, I think, when we talked about it, but me, the commander, Daedalus, have talked about it. This is not a Wunderwaffe by any means. But I know that Ukrainians. Yeah, we need a better word, but it's definitely we will see some really ballsy moves by the Ukrainians, in using.
Also, I'm not sure how much this might be part of their planning, because Ukraine has been, as we know, I assume we all know, restrained when it comes to attacking deep into Russian territory for a long time now. True. And Ukraine has been doing well with drone warfare. So I'm wondering just how much it sort of allows Ukraine to, if they can control more territory within Russia itself, it sort of opens up opportunities to do bigger drone attacks deeper into Russian territory, no?
I mean, the way that I look at it, I mean, granted, I haven't seen. That's what I've been trying to find. I really need to do better with following Russian Telegram channels, but I've been trying to locate. I've seen like Mulder, armored fighting vehicles there. I saw just recently, but I didn't see any real confirmation of it, so I can't trust it. But I saw recently, allegedly, some columns of Ukrainian Leopard 2A4s, and I think even some of the more updated Leopard 2 models that might be operating in Kursk region, but I haven't really seen.
There's been a lot of memes, but not a lot of hard evidence.
Yeah, not a lot of hard evidence.
For
but
example,
if they're operating Leopard 2s, which is very problematic. I mean, in terms of a historical memory standpoint, that's very problematic. It's not problematic to me in terms of a tactical standpoint. They'd be using them exactly with what they, I support it. But if that's really like, then they can use the F-16s, and they should, and I already kind of see like even Germany, basically saying, a lot of the Western leaders, I don't know if you notice this, Lucy, but what I've seen is like when something's going well, then they'll say, oh yeah, you can use it now. But when it's going bad for Ukraine, when Russia's when they need it most, when Russia's actually making steady ground, that's when they can't. Because what the West is afraid of, essentially, is this becoming one big debacle and disaster. There's still that possibility.
Listen,
Let's
I'm just
be very frank, but
I'm just a hateful Polish person. I don't know if you've seen all the videos of poor Russian people, of course, saying that Ukrainian people only hate Russia and the Russians because of those hateful Poles that whisper hate into their ear, and that also.
So I can actually come at this from a personal perspective. So I have I'm not going to name his name. His attitude has changed since actually the full-scale invasion, but I have Russian relatives. I have one who's a very big nationalist, like he was a pretty big nationalist, and was real. It's funny, I met him. We reconnected with these relatives in like 2010, so well before Maidan and all this antagonism. And he was encouraging me to go to Ukraine, go visit our ancestral birthplace, and I did all that. But he would say that exact same thing to me, that Western Ukrainians are not real Ukrainians at all, but they're actually Poles. And that it's kind of funny, like.
Okay, that's a little bit different than what is being said by Russians.
But he would also say, that it's because of he'd say it's because of the Poles that Ukrainians hate Russia, which is, it's counterintuitive, because then also he would say like, oh, those Banderites massacred all the Poles. So,
but then again,
let's
Putin
again,
also.
Let's again feed back into the offensive, right?
Of course.
But what I wanted to say is, if I had my way, Poland would be sending troops to Ukraine and also would be invading Kaliningrad, not just training.
Well, this is, I think, a point, because the assumption that's built into nuclear weapons, for example, is that you're not going to get invaded because you're going to get nuked. That alone makes this incredibly bold.
Yeah,
it does. I think.
Well, the problem is that if Russia, even though I've seen some pretty wacky proposals from the Russian side to, hey, it's our territory, let's just, nuke ourselves to get rid of the Ukrainian forces.
Yeah, no, that's something, that they would do.
But then also, Russia,
I don't think that would trouble them in the least.
I mean, the biggest resource of Ukraine is its soil, so I assume Russia does take into calculation that if it nuked Ukraine, it would render it useless. So the whole point of even invading it would be rendered useless.
The thing about soil in regards to Russia and, in terms of Ukraine's importance, so that really doesn't matter to them all that much. They're not really interested in that. They are interested, I'm sure, in the rare earth metals that are there. I mean, as are the West, unfortunately. There's part of the reason why on our end that there's some reason to fuel this. But at the same token, so southern Russia is a very fertile and productive agricultural spot. So they don't necessarily need Ukraine. They can actually manage themselves as far as food very, very well.
But I don't think it's just about managing themselves. It's about empire building.
Yeah, there's
it's about empire building, but it also has to do with historical narrative, and this is something I brought up a lot. Russia views, they place their founding myth within Kievska Rus. So, this is something, part of their whole foundational myth.
Yes, and they've also made, at least according to Vladimir Putin, they've made Poland part of this founding myth in a way. Like in a way, Poland is like the snake that corrupted Eve into eating the fruit. Poland has corrupted Russians into becoming Ukrainians by corrupting the Russian language with Polish, which...
he wrote about that. He wrote about the reasons why linguistically. Yeah, I mean that's diverting from the thing, but I remember exactly what you're talking about, and it's actually from a linguistic standpoint, absolute BS. Because archaic Russian actually shares a lot of these same similarities with Polish that Ukrainian does.
Yeah,
so
because
it's not. It has nothing to do. It's complete pseudo history. The whole thing is pseudo history. But in any case,
yeah, I don't actually, to be honest, I don't think that's what's really driving the, because I don't think that's sufficient. What's going to be sufficient to the oligarchs to take this risk in Russia? This has to be, to a certain extent, about resources, and I think one of the big problems that the Russians have encountered is that they did try to sort of manipulate the breadbasket, right? They did try to cut off grain shipments. And
there's a caveat to that. There's a caveat to that. So they were doing that, but also they were exporting a shitload of their own grain to the global south, and they're still doing that. So that's the caveat. It's also to kind of eliminate competition in that way. Also another thing too. So it's not just about resources too. It's also about great power politics. It's about sort of a multipolar world in their mind. And I'm not actually saying that in a positive way, because I find the way that quite frankly, that that we have behaved in the past is not a way to sort of emulate. Like, I think that every nation should be able to decide for itself. It's but that's kind of how Russia views the world in terms of spheres of influence, and that's really, I think, the reason why I also think it's kind of part of like Putin's sort of own ego as a legacy project. He wants to be seen, it doesn't matter how many people die, how many Russians die, how many Ukrainians die because of his hands, as long as the outcome is that, when he's dead, in the pantheon of sort of Russian heroes, he's the one who kept Ukraine from spinning out of orbit. That's what I see as the reason for this starting. The reasons are multifold, but that's primarily in his method of thinking, his logic, the reason why this started. Getting back to the actual situation. Lucy, you've seen probably some of the videos too, though, of like some of the elderly residents of Korskaya Oblast come up to Ukrainian soldiers, and they're actually like having friendly interactions. And I had mentioned it earlier that these people, like, they speak the same Surzhyk, they speak the mixed language. That is,
Which is very interesting, because in Ukrainian you say like ni or something along those lines when you want to say no. In Russian you say niet, and in the Surzhyk, the mixed one, you say nie, which is just Polish.
You say nya, and you can also say net as well.
Right.
But nie is like more closer to my heart, because it's just basically Polish. So I even joked once in a hostel, said when we talked about it, it was like, oh, so basically Polish is just a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian. Okay.
Well, I mean,
that's kind of like what I've heard people call it. I've also heard some rude people call Polish like Ukrainian if someone had a stroke.
So
I'm not trying to insult Polish, but it's kind of got like the strong hushers there, which kind of sound like someone if
yeah,
it's a beautiful language.
Moving on from linguistics, though, like the offensive in and of itself, I think I have seen reports that Ukrainians are striking at Russian air bases. So I would put forth a fourth theory. that part of this is also to try to relieve the pressure on Ukrainian air defense, at least in part, by damaging some of those forward operating bases.
That's a good observation. I hope it's actually the case, and I hope it's effective because
what we've been seeing,
yeah,
at least in the past couple months, is this very heavy air campaign by Russia, especially around
yeah.
around areas like Kharkiv and whatnot, to try and like exhaust Ukraine's defense.
Yeah.
And this is also where the thing that I've talked about with the drones comes in. And there's been some pretty big attacks on Russian airfields lately, haven't there?
Yes, at least 4, I think, in the last 2 weeks. Were hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily, like going back to the F-16, I don't necessarily think the F-16 in and of itself capable of suppressing the air defenses. But I think
No, not at all.
Use them for like standoff long.
Oh, for sure. And they could definitely in like, in a focused area make like they can definitely do some damage in a limited space. The issue is like, so Russia, when they're going to encounter the F-16 for the first time, my prediction is that they'll be thrown off by it for like the first couple of sorties, and then they'll be like, oh wait, we have actually some pretty good air defense. They'll actually adapt to Ukraine's tactics, and it's going to be a big problem after that. They're probably going to get a few of these, maybe more than a few of these shot down, and then Ukraine's not going to use them very much.
Already there's been talk that Ukraine has been asking for the F-16s when they were actually really, really crucial, and that Ukraine is getting them once Russia is already sort of prepared for them, so their utility is diminished greatly.
Yeah.
Right off the...
People were assuming they were going to use the F-16s in an air defense role, and apparently, at least based on what we've seen in the past couple weeks, it's primarily being used for a ground support strike role, which I find interesting.
I think probably that's a more... I mean, air defense in terms of intercepting drones and missiles, I could see. And maybe to a limited degree, using them, in raids against Russian bombers. But even then, I think honestly, like you're not going to see too many dogfights with these F-16s fighting, against Russian Su-30s. And if that does happen, I think that probably, Ukraine has capable people, determined people, but they probably won't do that big of an impact. They might shoot down a few of Russia's planes, like they might shoot down like a Su-30, and then people are gonna go talk about how amazing Ukraine is, and then they won't notice the other F-16s that are going to be shot down by other Russian aircraft. So I don't know.
And people forget that almost all the F-16s that they've been given are Alpha or Charlie variants. They don't have the Fs, they don't have the Gs, they sure as hell don't have the Vs. So these
don't even have the modern avionics.
Highly advanced aircraft. These are they're better than run-of-the-mill stuff, but
the way I figured it is like Ukraine has been fighting this war for some time now, like 14 years and 4 years of intense air conflict. They can replace airframes that they just can't maintain. What I figured was going to happen. Like they're basically getting the equivalent of what they had just in American stock. To put it mildly, when you put it next to Su-20, MiG-29s that make up the Ukrainian Air Force's striking power. Like they're basically just getting replacements.
Probably better parts support too.
Yeah, because they don't have to go to the enemy or for countries that have sold to them to get their parts anymore. So, like this use of the F-16 is on top of this already bold attack, very bold use of that asset.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm
interested to see if there will be if the movement and during the movement phase of this, which I think so far we're still seeing movement. If we'll see any, like if they brought in any of the Western MBTs, if we're going to see any like tank battles. That's kind of what people have been I hate to use the word waiting for, but they've been, there's
Beaming
always been
about,
some
for sure.
anticipation.
There's also been a lot of talk of Russia sort of burning through their tank stockpiles.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they use their tanks very poorly. And there's like most of the battles between tanks that I've seen in Ukraine have been very
Small.
it's very small, actually.
I usually see maybe
it-
4 tanks max in an area.
Yeah,
and they
people
had
are
a
not
lot-
using mass tank formations.
Yeah.
You typically are seeing some APCs or IFVs supported by 1 or 2 tanks.
they seem to be supporting the infantry, which is, kind of like either been being used in like raids, when Ukraine or Russia conducts a raid of a trench line, they've been used as sort of infantry support.
It's a mobile gun system.
Yeah. Both sides have not, except for I will make an exception that during the defense of Chernihiv, the Ukrainian tank brigade there did use their tanks quite well in sort of some of the ambushes that they conducted of Russian armored columns. But they didn't do that often, actually. A lot of what they did was pull back and use artillery on those columns. Ukraine has done really well with artillery. I'm actually almost like convinced that they are the best in the world today with artillery.
They had to, since they've been,
Yeah.
so little shells to use. They've had to learn how to use them efficiently.
Your question lies probably actually. What's going to happen is their capabilities are going to degrade over time. Manufacturing capabilities and their stored equipment. If it's not properly maintained and preventative maintenance isn't done, you're going to have like a whole.
We already know it's not.
Yeah, you're going to have a whole landfill of tanks that look like on a satellite like they're there, but not necessarily useful.
Like, we already know it has not been maintained even before the war. Like, during the start of the war, we had vehicles with rotting tires on the battlefield, so...
The troop missions are fast at the end of the day to really cruise missiles and ballistic.
Yeah, the kind of missiles they're using are good against stationary fixed targets. They have very little capability to be reprogrammed in flight.
Yes, and the other thing to consider about Russian missiles learned is they're not exactly accurate. At least not as accurate as ours are. So it's very difficult to kind of pick a spot and hit it really hard with a cruise missile strike the way the United States might. What they can do is they can fire off towards like Kharkiv and hit an apartment building, and they were hoping to hit an apartment building somewhere within a 5-block radius.
Yes, and especially if we're talking the borrowed missiles from North Korea.
Yeah, it's more refined than 5 blocks. It's probably like within a block or 2, as opposed to like U.S. Tomahawk.
They were able to.
You send it for a specific window on one face of a building.
They were able to target the...
Hetman has run out of energy. I think he's going to be back in a minute. Yes.
You mean laptop?
Yeah, like I don't know.
They were able to target the cancer hospital.
You would know more, Commander, about like you can basically put a tomahawk on a 10-meter window, right?
No, you can do it smaller than that.
Yeah, it's pretty like it's a very precise weapon and comparatively caliber and all those Russian missiles are not.
And it also has a limited ability to be reprogrammed in flight. So if you decide to change your target parameters in mid-flight, you can do it.
Yeah, it's a very precise system. And I don't know for sure, but I think the British missiles, the Storms,
Shadows?
Storm Shadows, yeah,
are pretty similar in that regard.
Yes.
Same basic technology. Now, to be fair, these are like horrendously expensive weapons.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, look, there goes $500,000 every time you let one off the chain. But they do a very precise job. The Russians missiles aren't the same. The thing about the offensive in and of itself is the other half of it is they have to be careful. Russia has to be careful in a way they were not in Ukraine to a certain extent, right? They have their own people there, and the Ukrainians can take advantage of that if Russia starts indiscriminately bombing their own.
Well, they're evacuating people now.
I think everyone is like Russia's evacuating some, but I think Ukraine is evacuating some people now too. Which is what they are supposed to do ultimately, right? It's law.
Well, Sumy region is still being sort of bombed, even as this is going, right?
Yeah, they've been retaliating. Like, there's drone reports even today heading into Kherson and Sumy and Kherson regions. So like Russia's retaliating, but I think they seem paralyzed a little bit to me. I don't know if you would agree with that assessment.
I think it's to some extent a fair statement, but I think it's possibly not a deliberate trying to avoid collateral damage and civilian casualties so much as they don't really have a solid idea of what targets to engage yet. Much of Russia's artillery is done with pre-programmed fires. So if the front is mobile, they have a fair degree of difficulty in calculating where they're going to be shooting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just drop positions. The U.S. Army will just say, we'll set up predetermined positions, but not. I could still give an order to have it fired off of that position, like 100 meters, 200 meters, right?
Yeah,
they might have a harder time with it. That's a little bit of math, to be honest.
Well, the one thing that strikes me as odd is you don't seem to get from the Russian side a lot of what we would call forward observer corrected fire.
Yeah.
So they'll have pre-registered coordinates and they'll say shoot at target number 72 Bravo and off the rounds go. But if they have to adjust fire to something that isn't directly on one of those pre-registered target sites, it's pretty complicated because to have a competent forward observer, you need to have somebody who's had a lot of training. And as we know, the Russians are significantly deficient in training their personnel.
Yeah, I remember actually when I was a cadet, I got taught how to make adjustments with my fingers for the mills on the protractor at different ranges. It was like 3 fingers over, but it was something you had to practice and get good at. It was not an easy. It wasn't like the most intuitive thing I was ever taught. And it's not the easiest thing. So like when Russia is down here in the south or in Ukraine proper, and they've got their fortified positions that are by and large not dramatically shifting. Like there's been advances and gains. There's been advances and gains.
I also think there's one reason that you see the Ukrainians, for lack of a better word, complaining about Russian artillery as much as they do when you're fighting in a fixed defensive position, because then the Russian artillery has the ability to get on target.
Yes.
Whereas if you're talking about mobile formations, and even in remember last year's summer offensive that was kind of a failure, even with the narrow scope of the movement that was going on there, Russian artillery had trouble being brought to bear on the Ukrainian assault columns trying to get through those minefields.
Yeah, they're not. It's like they're good at firing at the points, and they're not good. Like if you're not on the point, they're screwed.
Yep.
Which is funny in a lot of ways. It's like it's like oh, it's an army run by cadets almost, kind of the impression I get. Like it,
Good way of putting it.
yeah, like I remember one time I was being op for, and I was 5 meters off the assigned point in a much more covered position, and the U.S. force came up on me, started firing, and they got confused and turned around and left because I was 5 meters off, and they thought they were in the wrong spot. Like that's all it can take sometimes to screw you up if you're inexperienced. So.
So somebody in your chat stream here said something about, did the Russians simply not expect this was going to come today?
I don't think they did. I didn't expect this was going to come. It wouldn't be the thing I would do if I was the chief of Ukrainian staff.
Right. And I think what happened is because the Russian border had never been significantly penetrated prior to this, they figured that that was simply an off-limits area, that the Ukrainians were never going to try to go into Russia proper. And then as casualties mounted in the Avdiivka direction, they started pulling troops out of the line, weakening that sector already. And it's not a sector that was fortified like, say, the area down around Zaporizhia.
Yeah.
So when the Ukrainians hit it, there wasn't much defense. It wasn't well organized or well supplied, and so they were able to get through very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that also
And
speaks
if you look at it, that's kind of what happened up in Kharkiv.
last year before, yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is that Russia has been robbing Peter to pay Paul to keep the army in Ukraine. So on the one hand, I think Ukraine finally sensed they had an opportunity that they didn't have before. Try this. Because like the Russians are all over the place drawing in equipment that they just don't have to spare and are going to have a really hard time replacing.
Yeah.
So,
but I also think we need to realize this is kind of a fleeting opportunity.
Yeah, this is
because now that the precedent has been established that the Russian border is no longer inviolable, it means they're going to start putting up fortifications and manning the defenses along that line.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably a one-time deal, to be honest. Like, there's been talk of expanding into Belgorod Oblast and etc., like kind of the same route that Prigozhin was going to take, and I don't think that's going to be possible.
Some people say that the whole point of invading Kursk is to enter Belgorod from Belgorod.
Well, a lot of people have been saying a lot of things.
Well, there's a pretty big information silence, so all we can do is speculate, basically.
Can you hear me now, chat? Is it better? Can you hear me now? Is it worse? Should I start doing streams through interpretive dance?
Semaphore.
You have your camera on.
Yeah, we are. I don't have a video with the fake soundbar for Lucy. I have to make one of those. We'll have it for next time. Good. Okay, it's better now. I just dialed the gain up, so I probably sound like Darth Vader.
I wanted to point something out that goes back to an earlier part of this discussion about why the Russians are doing this. And I think it's interesting. Brzezinski, who was U.S. National Security Advisor back, I think, in Reagan, if I remember correctly. Anyway.
I think so. Hang on. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he said something along the lines that Russia without the Ukraine is no longer an empire. And I think that's a lot of what the mentality going on inside the Kremlin is that without having Ukraine, it's kind of like this, quote, dagger pointed right at the heart of Russia, because it puts any potential adversary, if they can make friends with the Ukrainians, very close to Moscow. They don't have that traditional ability any longer to trade space for time.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons this is such a strategic imperative to Putin and other people.
Like the hateful Poles could.
They want to build that buffer again. But of course, being Russians, once that buffer is established, then you need a buffer to protect that buffer. So then you have to have Romania and Hungary and Poland. And then after that, well, we need Germany. And you see where this is going.
I think the show Yes Prime Ministers described it best. The salami effect, right? They take off little slices of Europe, each one step at a time. I just hesitate because, and I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of the last year or so. I hesitate to ascribe the entire thing to the ideology of Russia, its founding myth, because it feels an oversimplification to me. They need the land, not so much for the land. I think you're absolutely right. They want the buffer zone. They want the resources. They want to control those resources and knock out the competition, especially for Ukraine providing so much food to the global south. But like, they have to have this concrete goal, this concrete gain of wanting to take the land back. To a certain extent, the ethnic stuff is kind of the window dressing.
Yeah, it's an excuse.
Yes, it's how they justify what they're doing. And which is why I and it's definitely a again, it's a comparison I hesitate to draw, but it's the same thing with Israel and Palestine, whereas the ethnic and religious stuff is kind of a window dressing for the conflict over land. It's hard for me in the course of military history to really identify ideological grounds upon which people are waging. It doesn't happen that often. And when it does, it's significant.
Yeah.
Traditionally, East Asia has always been a part of Oceania.
Yes. Or like...
Listen, I don't know if I even have room to speak with my hate, with my treachery. I just, every day I whisper hate to Ukrainian people. Go get them, Russians.
Well, the Ukrainians are plenty mad all on their own, too.
No. What are you talking about? Ukrainian people have no agency. It's just
watch.
They listen passively to Polish hate.
Yeah, you listen to Operator Starsky, and he's plenty mad.
But it's an interesting thing when I had conversation with Ukrainian people how the similarity between Polish and Ukrainian becomes this vehicle to sort of distance Ukrainian and Ukrainian people from Russian and Russia and the Russians.
Yeah, I don't, but I don't know if it's the main thrust of what's going on, to be honest. I don't.
Well, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
There's a lot of elements. There's a lot of different elements, and I think it's worth discussing even the small elements because as small as they are, they still matter.
Yeah, Hetman will be back. His stepkids apparently stole his power cord.
No. Do you disagree with my assessment?
About the small elements? I mean, I get it. I just don't know how much it factors into it. So, I don't think if it was just we want to unite the Ukrainian peoples, and that was really the reason. The Ukrainian peoples are just confused Russians, which is the polite thing of what the Kremlin is saying. I don't think that would be worth an invasion. I think it's very much...
Yeah, but you were also thinking about it from a very logical, rational point of view. It also doesn't make much logical sense to just throw waves after waves of people and lose 1,000 soldiers daily in an invasion.
Sure, but that's...
It also doesn't make any logical sense to start an invasion while having not maintained, not very well quality equipment to draw upon. That's it.
Yeah, but on a certain level...
You think that Russia would at least sort of prepare properly for such an invasion?
I would imagine.
I I think that's a lot of hubris.
Yeah,
Because
I don't know if they knew how screwed they were before they started this.
Well, the Russian system is in a lot of ways built on lies, because everybody steals and covers up the fact that they're stealing from people up above. Everybody knows they're doing it, but they don't have any idea of the true extent. And so when this kicked off and you found out, well, the tires aren't working, the vehicles don't have, coolant fluid in their radiators, et cetera, it caught everybody by surprise. And now they're coming down like a ton of bricks on people that they catch doing such things, because some people haven't realized that the old rules don't apply anymore.
Yeah, I think that's like a really important point that we haven't touched on enough in the last couple months. Russia is figuring out what their deficiencies are and they're correcting them.
Yeah.
So, like, to the point of like launching these mass human wave attacks, that's Russian traditional military values. By the way. That's what they do.
But a lot of people don't realize something. Those human wave attacks, in a lot of ways, were to buy time.
Yes.
Because a lot of the mobilization that occurred, a fair number of those troops, particularly from the, quote, ethnic Russian areas around Moscow and Leningrad and such, those guys actually went in and got a reasonable amount of training. And
as opposed to the rest of the country, yes.
Right. The other guys were just thrown in, here, sign this paper, here's a gun, go shoot something.
Yeah.
But so what's happening is a lot of the troops that are coming into the line in the Avdiivka direction these days are actually ones who've had some degree of training. They're not the same incompetent, empty out the prisons and, roll up the drunks and send them to the front group.
Yeah, and I also have noticed that Russia is reconstituting units that got absolutely mauled in the beginning of the invasion.
Oh, yeah.
Like their paratrooper units in particular. Mm-hmm. And they're reconstituting them with trained forces.
Yep. You take the surviving veterans, you promote them into leadership positions, and then you get trained personnel assigned to them, and you now have a somewhat effective unit.
Yes, and it's a unit that's capable of making these small actions.
Exactly.
And I think that's a key, too, here. Is like, so for the American military, we wouldn't send anything less than a company over the hill, right, to do the job.
Oh, yeah.
We don't train squad attacks, at least in the big army. And when they do squad attacks, the squad attacks are about evaluating cadets, not teaching cadets how to do squad attacks. Like it's not a skill that they develop, but it's a skill that the Russians can utilize because it's like the basic building block that they've mastered. They don't have to be great at the big stuff if they can do a lot of little stuff.
Exactly.
And it's a death by 1,000. It was prior to this, and it still is to a certain extent, but it was for Ukraine. Hang on, it was for Ukraine.
I think we also need to realize that Ukraine is to some extent undergoing the same problem.
Yes.
In the opposite direction. Because they're losing a lot of their veteran troops and reconstituting, particularly as these offensive efforts like the Avdiivka direction and such are going on. They're having to increasingly cut short.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Send in untrained personnel.
They should just send Polish troops on the ground. That's what I'm talking about. Poland is getting all that new shiny gear. Why not use it? Why not using it? We use it in the grounds of Ukraine and Russia.
Honestly, that's the thing that I find hilarious is all this Russian posturing about don't piss us off or we'll attack NATO. It's like, oh, please. Just attack NATO. We'll be in Moscow and Leningrad in a couple of weeks.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect.
At this point, I wouldn't actually. I don't like at the beginning of the 2022. I would have said yeah, but right now Russia's so thin on the ground that like I think that's actually a valid point.
Yeah.
They have destroyed their ability to have a defensive posture in order to prosecute this invasion. And that shows.
The only
in
thing
this,
they have is nuke posturing.
and that shows very much in the fact that Ukrainians are successfully able to invade Kursk, or the Kursk Oblast, rather.
The Russian nuclear doctrine. So I actually was going to bring this up earlier. From what I know, it's when the existence of the state itself is at threat. Now you can they can make many different interpretations of that, but overall, it seems like, like they really, I mean, they saber rattle a lot, but they really don't. They haven't had their sort of like one in regards to the West, any real bold move where say they move some launchers like sort of Cuban missiles crisis sort of thing close, but they really, it's a lot of it's hollow threats. I still am of the opinion though that the threat overall is real and it should be taken seriously. There are limits, in terms of what can be done, but obviously this isn't it. I don't think it's going to be it. And quite honestly, I think that this conflict is going to end either way with some sort of negotiations, and I'm hoping that Ukraine has some leverage in that negotiation. I hope that this will enable them to gain that, and that they can keep what they they're able to hold what they have taken in this incursion long enough to where it can be used in a meaningful way. Because otherwise, people were talking about negotiations starting already, and they would have had nothing on the table and forced to make concessions. Now they have something.
Yeah.
And it actually, that makes Putin and actually the whole government, the people have to really think, because, what is real Russian territory? What's hilarious actually is, the territory that is being, that the incursion's taking place on, like I mentioned before, this is actually traditionally Ukrainian speaking territory. So that's the funny part about it, actually, is a lot of the regions in Ukraine's south, I mean, granted, in villages, you have Ukrainian populations. You can look in like areas of Donetsk Oblast where you have like people dressed in their vyshyvanki, but really, actually, a lot of that region was more Russified even in the imperial era than the region that they made the incursion in. So that's the funny thing. That's actually the ironic part of it, is like, who's actually liberating territory here, it's
Finders keepers.
and you could, I mean, that's the interesting thing though. But yeah, like they're going to have to make some hard decisions, and that's what they needed. I'm hoping that I'm wishing the utmost success for this operation. I think everybody is, but at the very least, I'm hoping that they have a little slice of Russia that they bring to the bargaining table, because that's what this whole time they have needed.
Yeah, that's okay. We are gonna have to exit out soon. So let's bring it up to what are people's closing thoughts. Go ahead, Commander McMillan. What do you think? How is this going to go? How do we think this is going to go?
I think the Ukrainians will continue to make some gains, but as the Russians react and get more troops into position to block/slant counterattack, you're going to see the Ukrainian effort attenuate. I'd love to be able to say they may be able to get far enough to like cut off the Kursk nuclear power plant from the Russian power grid, threaten Kursk itself, the city, perhaps expand up towards Belgorod or down into Bryansk. But I don't think we're going to see the advances continue, certainly not at the rate we have been seeing in the past week or so, for much more than, say, a fortnight.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I was actually what I was thinking. We probably got about 2 weeks left of good news from here.
That's, I mean, unfortunately, I do share these same sentiments. You know, I think that that's the reality of it. That said, you know, I do know that the Ukrainians are, oh, go ahead.
We'll see. I think, the information silence makes it very effectively a thing where we just cannot say anything definitely. We just, it's an easy way to make a fool of yourself, to make a definite statement. Oh, this will happen, that will happen. This is for sure their goal. And this, this is for sure a good idea. This is for sure a bad idea,
No, it's too early. We don't know enough about it. I stick by a little bit of what I was just saying. I'm hoping that they're able to hold some of it long enough to when this starts to wind down, they have something. Because ultimately, without it, Ukraine is in a very, very worse position than it would be before this. So that's ultimately where my hope lies. Whether or not it'll happen, I mean, that's time will tell. I mean, That's all we can say. But I tend to agree with both Daedalus and the commander. I think it's going to culminate very soon. So hopefully, when it does, Ukraine's able to. From what I've seen so far, I've actually seen even Ukrainian excavating equipment. The plan.
They've captured a tank, T-80, I believe. Yeah, T-80 with ammunition.
But
so that's a thing we definitely know happened.
Yeah, but what Hetman was pointing out is he's seen engineering equipment going in the salient, which means they're prepared to dig in and hold what they've taken.
We've also seen, which indicates that this has been in preparation for some time, that I'm not going to say all, but we've seen damaged equipment being efficiently evacuated for repairs.
Yeah, I did notice that they have a good logistical train going.
They've been doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys covered this when I was away, but Russia is preparing trench lines way far away from actually where the advance is. So I think that they're anticipating further gains by the Ukrainian forces. I think that's about all I have to say. Let's hope for the best with this, and let's wait and see. I still think it's going to go down as one of the big. This is obviously the most success Ukraine has had since the fall of 2022 for sure.
Yeah.
And one thing that I follow the missing soldiers, it's called like Poshuk Soldatів під час війни. It's like search of for our soldiers during war. So like essentially loved ones post the relative that has gone silent or missing allegedly and whatever front. And I haven't really seen anything for this yet. So I mean that's a little.
That would be a lagging indicator at best, I think.
Yeah, I agree, but hopefully things go well.
Any final thoughts from you, Lucy?
Yes. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We can't know. We have to wait and be patient. And we have to send Polish troops. We have to send Polish troops to Kaliningrad, and because Poland has been gearing up, preparing for this. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Lublin Triangle is ready to become the Lublin Square. We were going to liberate our Belarusian brethren. We're going to create a Lublin Square, and we're going to kick Russia's butt.
Thank you for that unusually nationalistic sentiment.
Very nationalistic,
course.
but
All right.
we can only
wanna-
hope. We can only hope.
I want
right,
to
take
thank
care.
everybody for coming in tonight, Commander and Lucy. I hope everybody else has a good evening. And thank you very much. We are out.
Thank you. Bye-bye.